All right, everyone. So everybody's kind of confused with this card over here. Nobody really knows how it works. So I decided to make a video to finally explain to you guys. Like, once we're done with this video, you're going to know how this card works, all right? Chains of Mephistopheles. It's an enchantment from Legends. One black, one colorless. That basically says every time a player draws a card, that player must first discard a card from his or her hand. If there are no cards in the player's hands, take the top card from the library and place it in the graveyard instead of drawing. So it's a replacement effect. This enchantment does not apply to the first card drawn by players during their draw steps. All right, so what this word salad means basically is that besides the first card we draw in our draw step, right? Besides that one is not affected by this card. Any other card that any player draws anytime during his turn or the opponent's turn, that player must first discard a card before drawing that card. All right, so let's say I have a JM Tome and I tap 4 during my upkeep to draw a card. I first have to discard a card from my hands and then draw. Then comes my draw phase. I draw my first card of the turn. That card is not affected by this because it's the first drawn card in the draw step. And after that, let's say I've got a Library of Alexandria, which I activate because I have 7 cards in my hands to draw a card. Well, then again, I got to discard a card first before drawing a card. Then I decide to play Ancestral Recall. So Ancestral Recall, we all know, makes us draw 3 cards. So what I have to do is discard a card, then I draw, then I discard a second card, then I draw, then I discard a third card, then I draw. So that's how chains work. This card was built to stop the card advantage, to stop cards that make you draw extra cards during the turn. Now, that's the first part of the card. The second part of the card reads that if a player has no cards in his hands and draws a card, and again, not the first card that you draw during your draw step, another card anytime during your turn or your opponent's turn. If a player draws a card and he has no cards in his hands, instead of drawing a card, he mills the top card of his library and does not draw a card. So that means if you have no cards in your hands and you decide to draw a card with JM Tome, well, you're just going to mill the top card from your library to your graveyard. You're not going to draw a card. If you have no cards in your hands and your opponent decides to play Ancestral Recall and targets you, you basically have to mill 3 cards. So this card stops basically Ancestral Recall, Brain Geyser, Library of Alexandria, Sylvan Library, Time Twister, Wheel of Fortune, Howling Mine. What other cards are there that make you draw? The Sage of Latnam from Legends, Sinbad. Now I don't remember if there's other cards, but you get the idea. Any card that makes you draw extra cards is gonna get affected by this. Now, if a player plays Time Twister or Wheel of Fortune, well, you're gonna discard your entire hand, right? Let's say you play Wheel of Fortune. All players discard their hands and must draw 7 new cards. But because they have no more cards left in their hands, they have to mill 7 cards. So if Chains of Mephistopheles isn't playing and somebody plays Wheel of Fortune, it's basically a mind twist for everyone. And then everyone mills 7 cards. It's a complete card that it completely screws everybody up, basically. Same thing with Time Twister. Everybody discards their hand. Well, actually throws it in the graveyard, mixes everything back in your library, and then you mill 7 cards in your graveyard instead of drawing 7 cards. So Chains of Mephistopheles basically works good in a combo deck with the that artifact, the rack. So if you play a Chains of Mephistopheles with the rack, Wheel of Fortune, Time Twister, and even the one from Legends, the Winds of Change, will basically deplete the entire hand from your opponent. Now the problem is when it gets complicated, it's when there's 2 chains in play, or 3 or 4. It's a bit more tricky. So every time a player draws an extra card and it's not their first card drawn during their draw step, all the chains are going to trigger. So in this case, there's two chains. If I cast Ancestral Recall and I target my opponent, basically on the first draw one, the Ancestral Recall is draw 3 cards. So it's draw a card, draw a card, draw a card. So on the first draw 1 card, they both trigger. So it's discard 2, and then you draw a card. Then on the second draw, it's discard 2, draw a card. And on the third draw, it's discard 2, draw a card. So you could see that these could really deplete a player's hands. That's why it works so well with the rack. Now, let's say there's 3 Chains of Mephistopheles in play. All right? And the opponent has 3 cards. And I cast Ancestral Recall on my opponent. So the 3 chains are gonna trigger, making him discard 3 cards and then draw 1. And that has to be repeated 3 times because he's got to draw 3 cards. So it's discard, 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 draw. So now he's got 1 card in his hands. The second card draw from Ancestral Recall is going to trigger, again, all 3 chains. So he's going to discard 1, which brings him to 0. The second chain is going to trigger, but because he has no cards in his hands, he's going to have to mill the top card from the library to the graveyard. And because he's milling the top card from the library to the graveyard, there is no draw on the second Chains of Mephistopheles. So the third one does not trigger. And then on the third card that the opponent must draw, he's got to discard first. So the first chain is going to trigger. And because he has no cards, he's going to mill a card from the top of his library to the graveyard. And because he milled, he didn't draw, he milled instead, the 2 remaining chains have no effect. So in other words, when a player has to discard a card because he has cards in his hands, all the chains trigger, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 chains. When the player has no more cards left in his hands, as soon as 1 chain makes a player mill a card, all the remaining chains after have no effect. Now, it sounds complicated, but listen to this video again and you'll understand how it works. It's very simple. As soon as 1 chain makes you mill a card from your from the library to the graveyard, all remaining chains have no effect because there is no draw. So if there's 3 chains in play, and you cast Wheel of Fortune, all players discard their hands and then mill 7 cards. It's not because let's say there's 3 chains, you don't mill 21 cards from your library to your graveyard. It's just 1 chain that triggers every time 7 times. The other chains will not trigger. That's how this card works. Now, it could be kind of complicated. I get it, but it's such a fun card to play. There's a lot of explaining to do when you play this card most of the time because most players don't understand how the card works, but I explained it to you well. If anyone has any questions, just let me know in the comments. Get back to me and I'll try to be clearer if I wasn't clear enough. My opinion is that Wizards of the Coast should have printed this card as an enchant world when they printed this 30 years ago. I don't think they realized the fuck up this was going to make by not making this an enchant world. And I guess they had to backtrack after and play with the rules and bring in the actual replacement effect, not to make the other chains trigger because it's a replacement effect. If you mill, you don't draw. So you have no reason to discard any more cards after the first mill. But anyways, that's my opinion. I hope this video helped. Let me know in the comments if there's any other questions. All right, catch you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.